Clara's 60 years of London grit hadn't prepared her for this. A battered copy of Middlemarch lobbed through her open window by a rogue gust, pages fluttering like a disoriented pigeon. She clutched it, ink smudged and dog-eared, someone's margin note screaming cowardice is worse than grief. In frantic pencil. Outside, rain slicked cobblestones near Primrose Hill's indie bookshop, where a handwritten sign advertised "Bring a book, bury a sorrow." Clara's 60 years of London grit hadn't prepared her for how grief could turn a person into a misplaced bookmark, folded into a path she no longer recognized. After losing James, even her beloved second-hand bookshop, with its creaky floorboards and stubborn radiator that hissed like a disgruntled cat, felt like someone else's life. She'd catch herself staring his favorite novel, its spine cracked from rereading, and wonder if joy could ever feel as uncomplicated as turning a well-loved page again. Then came Book Swap Flyer, tapped haphazardly onto her shop's community board between ads for yoga classes and a lost tortoiseshell cat named Biscuit. Bring a story, take a story. Simple. Yet standing there, clutching that battered copy of Middlemarch James had gifted her decades ago, Clara hesitated. What if grief had erased her ability to connect? What if she showed up and just vibed wrong? But London had a way of nudging its stubborn daughters forward. She went. And there, amid mismatched teacups and a plate of slightly stale Jaffa cakes, something shifted. A woman with silver streaks brighter than her own shared how Jane Eyre got her through divorce. A bloke in a Bowie too laughed about weeping over Watership Down. Each path was a breadcrumb leading Clara back, not to who she'd been, but to who she might become. By third meeting, she'd stopped counting days since James died and started noticing how shops' dusty sunlight caught gold lettering on old spines. Grief hadn't vanished. But now it sat beside her like a well-thumbed novel, familiar, heavy, yet somehow easier to carry when others helped turn pages. Clara's 60 years of London grit hadn't prepared her for how quiet loss could be. Weeks after Arthur's passing, even her favorite armchair seemed too big, its cushions swallowing her whole. One drizzly afternoon, she wandered into a bookshop on Chiswick High Road, drawn by a handwritten sign, "Community Book Swap, bring stories, leave hope." She hadn't read much since Arthur's diagnosis, but weight of his old copy of Middlemarch in her bag, dog-eared, tea-stained, his scribbles crowding every margin, felt like a nudge. Inside, mismatched chairs circled a stack of paperbacks, and a woman with silver braids waved her over. "Newbies pick first," she said, pushing a tattered Persuasion into Clara's hands. "Jane Austen's a solid rebound," woman almost laughed. Her age, reboots weren't supposed to hurtle in with this much chaos. She fumbled through her first meeting, mistaking magical realism for cookbooks, but no one minded. Instead, they passed tissues when a passage about second chances hit too close, and chuckled when she admitted she'd skipped ahead to happy endings. Week by week, books became bridges. A retired teacher lent her Secret Garden, its pages smelling of lavender, and she found herself planting seedlings on her balcony. A young mum, drowning in sleepless nights, swapped thrillers for poetry and left lighter each time. Even Middlemarch found new life, handed to a widower who traced Arthur's notes like a map. Then came Slip Up, literally. Creator tripped over a tight bag, sending a first edition Wuthering Heights airborne. Instead of gasps, group erupted into applause when she caught it midair. Ninja reflexes, someone cheered. For first time in months, she didn't feel like a guest her own grief. By summer, she'd organized a pop-up bookstall Portobello Market, stacking stories where strangers could trade sorrows for fresh plots. Arthur's margin scribbles now lived in 3 different libraries, his handwriting a quiet rebellion against endings. London hadn't changed, but Clara had. Grief, she realized, wasn't a solo read, it was a dog-eared, tea-stained, wildly underlined group project. And somewhere between page 42 and last chapter, she'd found her footing again, one swapped story at a time. Clara's 60 years of London grit hadn't prepared her for how quiet loss could be. Not kind of quiet that settled over a rainy afternoon with a cuppa, but hollow sort, like an empty bookshelf where favourite stories once lived. She'd tried filling it with busy work, dusting knickknacks, rearranging shelves, but grief had a way of sneaking back in, curling up beside her like an uninvited cat. Then came Flyer, slightly crumpled, tucked between grocery receipts, community book swap and grief circle. Below, someone had scribbled in pencil, "Bring a story, leave with a new one." She scoffed. She wasn't some weepy heroine from a paperback. Still, fingers lingered on that old novel tucked in her bag, her late husband's favorite, spine cracked from years of bedtime readings. Maybe it was time to let it go. Or maybe, just maybe, find someone who'd understand why she couldn't. Hesitation clung as she pushed open bookshop door, its bell jingling with forced cheer. Inside, mismatched chairs formed a loose circle, occupied by faces worn soft by time and trial. A woman in a chunk-knit cardigan waved her over, patting an empty seat like they'd been expecting her. Creator clutched novel tighter, suddenly aware of how absurd this was, 60 years old and nervous as a schoolgirl. But then, grief had a way of making fools of them all. One by one, stories unfolded, not just from pages, but from lives. A silver-haired man spoke of his wife's dog-eared cookbooks, their margins scribbled with inside jokes. A younger woman, ice-sharp with unshed tears, held up a thriller her brother had mailed weeks before his accident, still unread. When Clara's turn came, words stuck like old glue. But fingers traced novel's frayed edges, and without meaning to, she found herself laughing, dry, self-aware, about how her husband used to snore through boring bits. Laughter rippled through group, warm and unexpected. That novel, once a relic of absence, became a bridge. By evening's end, it sat in another's hands, while Clara left with a well-loved poetry collection, its pages smelling faintly of lavender. Not a trade, but a thread pulled taut between strangers. Walking home, London's drizzle felt different. Lighter. She wasn't fixed, no quick cure for her heart's cracks, but quiet wasn't so hollow anymore. Maybe healing wasn't about moving on, but moving with. And if that meant showing up next week, stubborn as ever, well, 60 years of grit had to count for something. Clara's 60 years of London grit hadn't prepared her for how heavy grief could sit, like a damp novel left too long on a shelf, pages warped with sorrow. But she refused to let loss define her. Instead, she marched into that musty community centre with a dog-eared copy of Middlemarch clutched tight, its spine cracked from years of love. Tonight wasn't just about discussing books. It was about stitching hearts back together, one shared story at a time. She'd started small, a handwritten sign taped to a lamppost outside her favourite bookshop. Lost someone? Bring a book. Find a friend. Skeptics scoffed. A sharp-elbowed woman in a tweed coat muttered about sentimental nonsense as she passed. But Clara. She stacked paperbacks on a wobbly folding table, brewed terrible tea in a dented kettle, and waited. By month 3, her book swap had outgrown its corner. Word spread like a well-loved plot twist. Grieving teachers, widowed bakers, even a retired punk rocker with a tattoo of Wuthering Heights on her forearm, they came. Each person carried a book that meant something, their grief tucked between dog-eared pages like forgotten bookmarks. Then came Clara's gutsy move. She convinced a skeptical librarian to let her display their grief library in Atrium, a tower of donated novels, each with a sticky note explaining why it mattered. This got me through chemo. Mum read this to me when I was 8. Center. That battered Middlemarch, its margins scribbled with Clara's own notes. James loved this part. Opening night, tweedcoat skeptic showed up. Arms crossed, lips pursed. But as she read notes, her frown wavered. Then, click. A tourist snapped a photo. By morning, Healing Pages was trending. A local news crew shoved microphones in Clara's face. "It's not about me," she insisted, but her hands shook as she smoothed Middlemarch's cover. Standing there, surrounded by strangers turned storykeepers, she felt it, a shift, like moment a book's climax clicks into place. She wasn't just a widow. She was woman who turned grief into something with spine and glue and ink. Tweedcoat Lady approached, clutching a tattered Pride and Prejudice. "My husband's," she said, voice thick. "Thought I'd never want to read it again." Creator handed her a fresh sticky note. "Start here." Later, as laughter buzzed over lukewarm tea, Clara caught her reflection in a shop window, silver hair, crow's feet, a grin that hadn't been there a year ago. "I finally belong here," she thought. And for first time in ages, weight in her chest felt lighter than book in her hands. Clara's 60 years of London grit hadn't prepared her for how quiet loss could be, until Dogged Pages started talking back. That tattered novel, left behind like an unspoken condolence, became her compass. She didn't just read it, she built a raft from it, launching a book club where grief wasn't shushed but shared over Earl Grey and accidental biscuit crumbs. Her quirky habit: stacking books like Jenga towers while members swapped dogged paperbacks, community healing one sticky note at a time. Soon, strangers became lifelines, their stories braided tighter than a well-worn spine. Clara guided with a bookseller's instinct, hosting events where laughter rattled dusty shelves, proving sorrow could coexist with second-hand bookshop vibes. By year's end, that old novel, now shelved beside fresh picks, had sprouted wings. Clara's club birthed spin-offs, poetry slams for widowers, teen groups dissecting grief through dystopian fiction. Even her local pub hosted lit and lager nights. Age: just a number in margins of her next chapter. Loss hadn't vanished, but it no longer sat alone. Every swapped book carried whispers of resilience, every meeting a rebellion against silence. Clara's legacy? Proof that stories stitch hearts faster than time. Grab a book, swap your sorrow. Next page heals.